right, welcome back. We are continuing our exploration of chapter 5, all about evolution. In our previous video, sorry, I'm really low. In our previous video, we talked all about what exactly is evolution, what affects that rate of evolution. We also talked about non-random ways that evolution occurs. So we talked about natural selection, which is nature caused or nature chosen. And we also talked about artificial selection or human chosen, human caused. We're now going to be continuing our exploration of chapter 5 by talking about, first and foremost, our random ways that mutations or evolution occurs. One of those ways, the random ways that evolution occurs, is via mutations. So during that process of recombination, during meiosis, we have all that crossing over that's happening. We might have some random changes in the genetic code of an organism. Now, this is a huge misconception that people have about mutation. Sometimes I'll get students and they'll say, like, if I ask them, how is the species going to adapt to an area? They'll say, oh, it's just going to mutate to do this. But the thing with mutations is that they are completely random. I cannot force any creature or no species going to just magically mutate in the way that's going to be beneficial and allow them to adapt. What happens is during that transcription, translation process, we have random mutations that lead to differences in traits. Those random changes could then happen to be beneficial to an organism's survival. If it does end up increasing their fitness and making them more easily able to survive, then we would call that a beneficial mutation that's going to be passed down through future generations. So example, in this picture here, we have mice that had primarily a white coat color, but then we had a mutation that caused a black coat color in the mouse. Time and multiple generations shows that for whatever reason in this scenario, the black coat color was more beneficial or led to an increase in survival for the mice population. And so we see a future population where we have a greater percentage of the black coat color because it increased survival. Maybe it allowed the individual to better be able to camouflage, for example, if there's primarily dark colored surroundings. So mutations are random changes that could be beneficial to survival. If they are beneficial, it will be passed down and lead to evolution, that change in a population over time. Another random way that evolution can occur, if we're thinking about evolution as the change in the demographics of an area, the change in the genetic composition of the organisms in a population, gene flow is the physical movement of genes from one area to another. So whenever I think about gene flow, I think of the flowing and the movement of the genes, those genotypes and phenotypes from one area to another. So I think about immigration into an area and emigration out of an area. So in this example here that we see for gene flow, I have the bluebirds who are homozygous dominant, big H, big H. And on the other side of the mountain, I have the redbirds. The redbirds are homozygous recessive, little h, little h. We have some gene flow, so movement of these genes to create a new change in each of these populations where I now see a heterozygous individual, big H, little h on either side. So instead of being all homozygous dominant, I now have some homozygous dominant, but I also have probably some homozygous recessive from the redbirds, and I also have some heterozygous. So we're changing that genetic makeup of the area. Again, this is a random way that evolution can occur, the change in the genotypes of an area. All right. Another random way that evolution can occur is via genetic drift. Genetic drift, just by definition, is random mating that affects genetic composition. So whenever I think about this, I think about this being the opposite of sexual selection. So sexual selection is whenever individuals are being chosen to mate with based on some sort of physical characteristic, right? So in female cardinals are always looking for the flashiest male. They're looking for the brightest male, the most red male to mate with because they want their babies to be nice and flashy and bright and colorful. So females in bird populations are very choosy usually. They're going to be having what we call sexual selection. They're choosing who to mate with based on those physical characteristics. Some species, though, are featuring more of this random mating. It doesn't really matter what they look like. They're just kind of like, oh, like I bumped into you. Like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, you're the one. Humans are another one where we are more on the sexual selection side. But anyways, because there's random mating, whatever the demographics are of a current population is going to be influenced future generations wise by the size of that population. Larger populations, because they're so much broader any changes that I see due to this random mating aren't really going to show as well as we will in a small population. So whenever we're having random matings via chance, we're probably going to have some fluctuations of the composition of the population. In a small population, because it's such a small sample size, we're going to actually be able to see those changes, but in a large population, we would not. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So up here, I have a small population and I have a large population at the bottom. In the small population and the large population, both of them have the exact same genetic composition, right? I have 40% of the black-coated mice and 60% of the white-coated mice for both scenarios. But whenever I have just sort of genetic drift, random mating, I'm seeing the effects more in the small population because I have a smaller sample size. So any changes that result are going to be more easily seen in this smaller sample size than in a larger sample size. In a larger group, such as the larger population here, any fluctuations that happen are really going to even out over the years, and so we're not really going to see that much of a difference. So in this one, even just the slightest increase, maybe because there just happens to be slightly more white-coated mice in here, in future generations, we might continue to see that increase and increase over time of more and more white-coated mice, and we'll see a decrease of the black coat color gene in this small population. Whereas in the large populations, yes, we might have annual year-to-year highs and lows, but because there's so many mice there, we're really not going to notice those changes as much. Now, there's two subtypes of genetic drift that you should be familiar of. Again, genetic drift, we're talking about random mating instances that are going to be affecting genetic composition of an area, also known as evolution. One of those, and let me move my face over here, one of those is the bottleneck effect. Bottleneck effect, I mean, if you think about a bottle, I have a bottle right here. Thank you, eco columns. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. Thinking about a normal bottle, or think even like a Coke bottle would have been better, but I have a large portion of the bottle here at the base, and then it goes up to a narrow neck, a narrow top at the very end of it. So similarly, in a bottleneck effect, we have a large population that suddenly shrinks in size. It's almost as if we have all the animals here in this bottle, and they're all getting shoved up through the top of the neck of the bottle, and so only certain ones are actually going to be able to fit through. This is usually a random event. I always think about bottleneck in terms of natural disasters. So there's a forest fire, there is a deforestation, a volcano explodes, hurricane attacks, okay? Something that it doesn't really matter what your traits are, random individuals are going to be surviving and random ones are not going to be making it through. So in this bottleneck effect, a small subsample is actually the ones that survive. Because they're the only ones that are surviving, whatever genes they have are the only ones that are available to compose future generations. Because these are my only individuals that are mating and passing down those genes. I've completely lost certain phenotypes. In this one, the no spot phenotype has been completely lost, as well as, well, I guess small spots is still living on. Yay, small spots and big spots. So in bottleneck effect, we have a small subsample. The small subsample is passing down the genes for the next generation. Another example, oh man, I gotta move my face again. I'll go over here. Another example of genetic drift, these random events, is the founder effect. And the founder effect is very similar to bottleneck in that I start with a large population and it goes to a small population. And the founder effect is exactly like it sounds, a small subset of a main population branches off and goes to an area that is previously uninhabited. So in an area where there's no bird cardinal genes or whatever, I don't know, those are blue cardinals, okay. Anyways, in an area where there wasn't any blue, gray, or red cardinals, I now have this influence of genes. However, in my original founding population, no blue birds came over there. And so in my new population, I'm only going to have gray and red phenotypes, even though the species has the capability of being blue, because only individuals with those traits actually came over and formed my new population. Now, if an individual down the line had a mutation, one of those other random ways that evolution can occur, if an individual has a mutation, they now have a blue coat color that ends up being advantageous. Absolutely, it can be passed down later on. But at the first onset of this instance, we have a small population that's forming our newest population. This is our founder effect. Okay. Oh my gosh, that actually scared me. Sorry. But it is really funny. Have you ever seen those face swaps? Good one. Okay. Sorry, I was trying to move my face and then just like, we're doing our best here. All right, speciation. If we break down that word, we're talking about the creation of new species. Species creation occurs via two different ways, or two main subsets of ways that species can be newly formed. One of those is allopatric speciation. The other one is sympatric speciation. So let's talk about it. Allopatric speciation, I feel like you've heard of it, even though you don't know it. You've probably learned way back a long time ago that one way species can occur is via geographic isolation. Okay, I have this species of deer, and then they're all together. This is all one species of deer. Some sort of physical barrier, some sort of geographic barrier arises, maybe a mountain. I know it takes a really long time for mountains to form, but bear with me. A mountain, a fence comes up, an earthquake splits the area, something, okay? And now my one population has now been split into two subsets. Over time, through lots of interbreeding of those two different populations, we're going to end up creating two different species over time. And this is just because we're not having that mixing of those genes anymore. And so because of that, there will become a point when those two different species will become different enough that they are now two different species, even though they started as another one. So allopatric speciation includes geographic isolation. Over time, it leads to reproductive isolation. Individuals can no longer breed. So for example, Darwin's finches actually came from an ancestral bird from, I believe, the mainland of South America, I want to say. So this one bird came from South America, or a small population, founder effect, went to the Galapagos Islands where Darwin found the finches, and have now become completely different species from the one that they came from, their ancestor from South America. And again, this is this geographic isolation. They spent so many years apart that eventually, as they both independently evolved, they became two different species. So that's our allopatric speciation. Sympatric speciation probably is new, but hold on, we could totally get this. Sympatric speciation, whenever we have organisms that are polyploidy. Polyploidy is a word that means many sets of chromosomes, more than two sets of chromosomes. So human beings, we are diploid, right? We have 23 chromosomes, and I have two of each of those 23 chromosomes, two diploid. That's how many sets of chromosomes we have. But some things, such as strawberries, if you did a strawberry DNA lab, the reason that you're able to see the DNA in the strawberry lab is because I think it has like 8 times the amount of chromosomes. Strawberries have like an insane number or set of chromosomes. But snails, salamanders, lots of our crops, wheat, flowering, fruits, a lot of those are polyploidy. They have more than 2 sets of chromosomes. A lot of times this happens artificially. So fruits that are polyploidy actually are bigger. So sometimes farmers and agricultural scientists will actually go in, and during that process of meiosis will actually add in more chromosomes and will artificially create fruit that have more sets of chromosomes than they would have originally. And once there's 2 different sets of chromosomes, let's say I have an ancestral strawberry that had 2 sets of chromosomes, and now I have a new polyploidy strawberry that has 6 sets of chromosomes. Holy cow. Because they now have 2 different sets of chromosomes, they are now deemed 2 different species because they can no longer breed together. Individuals that only have the same amount of chromosomes are actually able to breed. So if I'm adding in, I'm creating a new strawberry that has added in chromosomes, it's now no longer able to breed with its ancestral one. So this is a speciation, the process of creating a new species. Allopatric is geographic isolation, physical barriers, creating that new species. Sympatric is we're looking at those chromosomes. So here's just a diagram. Again, we have a common ancestor for the allopatric speciation of Darwin's finches. We had a common ancestor from South America mainland. It migrated to the Galapagos Islands, and through different adaptations, natural selection occurred, and different individual birds who had different adaptations for eating ground seeds and eating tree things and eating vegetables. All these different ways that these birds have now branched and become all these different species of finches that all came from one original finch. So scientists, we've talked a little bit. Scientists want to know, how does evolution occur? They want to know what mechanisms. They also want to know, how fast is evolution going to occur? We call this the pace of evolution. And there's 4 main factors that affect the pace or the speed that evolution occurs. One of those is the rate of environmental change. So back in chapter 3, we learned that environmental distress or disturbances are going to affect how fast or what organisms are able to live in that environment And we learned that we want a medium amount of environmental disturbances. If there's no environmental disturbances, then there's nothing for evolution and evolution to act on. So there's no adaptations making some better than others if everyone's just surviving in kumbaya. But too much environmental disturbance, then like everything's dying. So we want like a medium amount of environmental disturbance. Same thing with environmental change, the speed that it's happening. If it's happening too slow, then it's more time for everyone to adapt. And if everyone's adapting, are we really changing? So if the change is happening at a slow enough pace, we're not seeing that evolution where certain individuals are having a leading edge. So if we have a medium amount of environmental change, it gives certain individuals that have those beneficial traits, those adaptations, that upper leg, that they're able to actually have a competitive advantage over the others around them. And that's where we start seeing differential selection. Natural selection is taking place, and we actually see that evolution, the change in the species. Genetic variation is also going to affect how fast evolution happens. Evolution has to work on differential traits. And so if we have a low amount of genetic variation, evolution doesn't have much to work with. But if I have a population that has high amounts of genetic variation, I see lots of different traits, lots of different genotypes and phenotypes in a particular species or population, that means that evolution has something to work with, right? It's able to favor and select certain traits that are more beneficial than others. And so having a high amount of genetic variation increases the likelihood and the speed that evolution is actually going to happen. Population size also is going to affect that evolutionary pace. So similar to genetic drift, where small populations, you see those changes more readily because you have such a small sample size. I mean, I'm going to go back to this slide really, really, really quick. We saw that when we had my small population, we see this rapid change over 2 generations. We went from like almost a 50-50 split to a 100% white coat color versus the large population. We didn't really see those changes. So it's the same thing in the population size. If I have any mutations, those are going to spread quickly in a small population because there's a lot of intermating and interbreeding happening in there. Finally, generation time. This probably makes the most sense to you guys. If I have individuals that have short generation times, the time that it's going to take for a mutation or a change to spread throughout the entire population is going to be much faster. So if it takes, let's say, 100 generations for something to change, to go from one individual to the entire population, if I have an insect that's generation time is 5 days versus an elephant where it's a dozen years, it's going to be a lot shorter for the 5-day generation to go through 100 cycles, 100 generations, than one that's a couple decades, right? So depending on how quickly or fast those generation times pass by, it's going to affect the speed that those mutations and beneficial traits actually spread in the population. Okay, we are almost done, friends. We are like literally almost at the end. The ability to adapt and change environment conditions will determine whether the organism will survive or go extinct. If you can't keep up with change of environmental factors, then you're not going to be able to continue moving forward. That's why that biodiversity is so important. We want that mix of traits to allow individuals to actually be able to make it through those environmental disturbances. Oh my gosh, we got so many jokes today. How to make a tissue dance. Put a little boogie in it. All right, I don't know how to like laugh after jokes. Okay, sorry. All right, we are at our very last concept. I think we have this side and one more slide, so we can make it. Kind of what we were talking about earlier, we want a medium amount of environmental disturbances. Too much disturbance, no one's living. Too little disturbance, everyone's kind of competing with each other. So very similar to that, all organisms have a range of tolerance, and we're always looking for that happy medium. Range of tolerance, we're looking at salinity levels, like how much salt, we're looking at pH, we're looking at temperature, and other abiotic factors, soil fertility, all these different abiotic factors that tell me what are the ideal conditions that I'm actually going to live in. So for example, I as a human being, I do really well at neutral pHs. Like 6 to 8 pH is my happy zone. If you put me in this crazy poison vat that had like a pH of 3, I'm not going to do so hot because that's outside of my range of tolerance. Everyone has a different range of tolerance. So when we're looking at the range of tolerance, this is kind of a graph to illustrate that. Let's say for temperature, and I'm looking at performance or ability to actually survive, reproduce, and pass on those genes, also known as fitness. I see that at my extremes outside of my range of tolerance, I'm just able to survive. like I'm making it, but we're not doing great. We're just hanging on for dear life. A little bit more inside of that, we're able to survive and we're able to grow, but it's still too stressful conditions that I'm not actually able to reproduce. It's only within what we call the fundamental niche. This is whenever I'm able to survive, grow, and reproduce successfully in an area. Our fundamental niche is all the range of temperatures that I'm going to be able to most ideally live and work in as an organism. From the fundamental niche, though, let's say I'm a bird, okay, and my fundamental niche is this beautiful tree. And this tree has the perfect abiotic condition. It has all the food I need, all those abiotic and non-living things that I need. This tree is wonderful. However, I am a bird that could live anywhere on the tree, but there is some dang woodpecker that is a bully, and the woodpecker is competing me for the trunk of the tree. The woodpecker needs to get all the bugs in the tree. So this woodpecker is kicking me out, and I'm not able to live in the trunk of the tree. I'm only able to live in the canopy or the branches of the tree. That canopy would be my realized niche. The realized niche is we're taking into consideration, okay, not only the abiotic factors, the salinity, the pH, the temperature, the air quality, but I'm also thinking about what are the living things around me. In particular, this is going to be competitors and predators and habitat size. So the fundamental niche, let's say in that example, as a bird, could be an entire tree. I could live anywhere on the tree. That's my fundamental niche. It has all the abiotic factors I need. But my realized niche may be just a smaller part, just the top of the tree, because I'm being outcompeted, biotic factor, I'm being outcompeted by another bird species that is taking inhabitants in the trunk of the tree. So I'm being partitioned to a different area of tree. This is my realized niche where I actually live. Predators can also be a factor that's going to affect where I actually end up living, as well as habitat size and habitat availability. Now, we also want to know two different types of ways that we can categorize animals. And this, I feel like, always comes on the AP test. So definitely pay attention to this. We have generalist species versus specialist species. And thankfully, these words kind of sound like what they actually mean. That's always nice when that works out. Our generalist species can live very generally. They can live under a wide range of conditions. They're not very picky. In the bird example, I could have lived anywhere in the tree. I got kicked out of the trunk, whatever. I'll live in the trees. It's totally fine. They're easily able to adapt. This is really beneficial. Our generalist species, especially when we have those natural disasters and I have a very rapid change in my environment, I need species that are going to be able to adapt quickly and be able to kind of go with the flow, even when their ideal conditions have been changed. In contrast, my specialist species are specialized, right? They only live in specific habitats. And so, especially when we're thinking about climate change, what we'll get to later this year, when my habitats are rapidly changing, when the temperatures and the availability of water and the availability of habitat size is changing rapidly, some species that are specialists and their adaptations and their traits are only specific to one particular type of habitat, and we're losing those habitats, those species are more likely to go extinct because they're not able to continue living if their current habitat is being taken away. And so we really want to think about our specialist species. They are very important to continue keeping when we think about climate change and the change of our world around us. That is all I got for you guys, though. So we're going to end today with our riddle. What gets broken without being held? Think about it. Otherwise, I hope you guys have an amazing day. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all that you guys do, and I will see you guys in class. Thank you very much.